Hi everyone. This is actually great because Diego and Megan has now gone through exactly the things that I didn't want to discuss in too much detail, so I can focus on the more interesting part. Now, a little bit about us. I'm from Adjust. I'm the product manager. We see ourselves as a business intelligence platform for mobile apps. This means that we work a lot with attribution analytics, we work a lot with in-app analytics, and we work a lot with App Store insights, as we see this as a part of, let's say, a coherent, holistic whole. And this is really the kind of idea that we have for analytics across the board. And this is also what I like to discuss when it comes to what I call power marketing tools. Now, briefly, my role at the company is pretty much to talk to our clients, figure out how to implement their tracking, try and interpret the data that they have coming in, kind of see where can we help them most. And so power marketing tools is something that I'm seeing coming up more and more. And this includes stuff like re-engagement, retargeting. This includes stuff like cohort analysis that we've been working on and we've been pushing for the last 6 months or so. This is also more advanced capabilities in terms of store analysis. Deep linking naturally is part of that as well. Now actually, I only call it power marketing tools because I like the name. It sounds cool. I don't actually know what any of these things on the pictures do, but hey, if someone can explain to me, that'd be nice. Now, I'm not actually going to discuss too much about retargeting. Instead, what I want to go through is a quick case study that we were working on with a client of mine, because I think what we can see here is we can tie all these kind of techniques together. Diego's made a great presentation or a great introduction to retargeting in general. So I'd just like to go through a case study that we did with a company called Hardscore Games out of Berlin. Now, Hardscore Games is launching a spaceship kind of trading card game for mobile. And with doing so, they're trying to aim for kind of a niche market. They're looking for a bit more hardcore players. And so they've been doing a bit of a soft launch for the last couple of months. They've been trying a few different things out, trying a few different segments, trying a few different targetings with a few different gaming networks. And now they're about to do their global launch in a couple of weeks. So a few weeks ago, they came to me and they said, okay, well, we need to find out what is actually our dream targeting. Where are our best users? What are we actually going to go for here? So what they had done for a long time is they used our tools to pick up all of the publisher IDs from all the networks they were working in. So they had publisher IDs which uniquely denote every single placement of every single ad. Now, this is quite a lot of detail. I see people doing this all the time. So what they wind up having is they wind up having this list of thousands of this nondescript app IDs. They don't really tell you anything. None of them really have sample sizes to do any analysis whatsoever. And this is kind of where we can bring in some of the kind of more brunt App Store analysis that we have, because what we realized after poking in this and looking at some different kind of country cohorts, install date cohort, a few things like that, we found that the best way of doing it was to pull out the subgenres. So what we did is, as a first step, you go out and you run all these soft launch campaigns and you try them out and you see what their performance is, and you track this all the way down to sub-publisher ID level. As a second level, we took our App Store analysis, which is also encompassed as a free service, apptrace.com, and we hooked them all up to pull out data on, okay, what are the reviews for each app that served ads, what are the genres, what are the subgenres, where are they kind of coming from, what are people talking about in the reviews, and then we found out in the end that we pulled out the gaming subgenre. And so at that point, we kind of came into, okay, let's find out what metric we're going to be evaluating this on. So we've segmented it by subgenre. We've got a little bit better segments. Now, instead of having, 2,000 segments, we have something like 20. I mean, that's something that you can look at. You can pull that up in an Excel sheet and think about it. So having done that, it's now time to kind of pick out the metric that we wanted to evaluate. Now, in the soft launch stage, it's important to think about, okay, well, what am I actually trying to make the users do here? And I've been kind of discouraging people at this stage from trying to focus too much on, let's say, revenues, or let's get, specific registrations or specific friend sharing. What they were saying was, okay, I need engaged users. I need early adopters that can come in, play the game a lot, get to know it, get really good at it, and then see what happens. So they wanted the most engaged users. And engagement, I think, is best encompassed in simply the number of sessions. How many times do they open the app? over and over. So we took the number of sessions, and then what we wanted to do was we wanted to just have the engagement trends within their lifetime. So we pulled a cohort analysis. If you're familiar with this, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you're not, you can check out some of my earlier presentations. But with cohort analysis, we can take out specifically at different points in the lifespan of a given user, how engaged were they at that point, right? So instead of taking an average of all the users that you have, how engaged are people in general right now, you take out, okay, how engaged were my users on average on day 3 or day 4 or day 5, so on and so forth. And so doing that, you no longer have users that are old and super engaged, new users that are just coming in and playing around a little bit. Instead, you have a kind of consistent metric between user from user. So having done that, we calculated the number of sessions per active user from install date cohorts over 4 weeks after install. That's a bit of a mouthful, but what we're trying to do here is we're trying to isolate out the trends, find a single metric that really, really works to see this kind of engagement. And at that point, when we have this metric, we just kind of pull it into Excel, and we did this whole thing in our Excel exports. And so you could simply do a VLOOKUP, do a few pivot tables, that sort of thing. I know a lot of guys who wind up, pulling up ClickView or some nice enterprisey business intelligence solution, but a lot of the times when you're doing this kind of analysis, I tend to find that it's easier to stick with what you really know. And so what we found was actually pretty cool. I like this. So this is a short version of the table that we wound up with. This is a list of this is a filtered list of some of the main categories that we saw in this soft launch stage. And these numbers here are index calculations for, let's say, sessions per user, or is sessions per user for certain weeks after install. And what we see here is that really the genre that performed by far the worst is the strategy genre. Now, for a mobile strategy game, that stands out as a little bit odd. You would have kind of thought, okay, I want users who like strategy games because they like my game, because it's a strategy game. But that doesn't seem to be actually what the data pointed to. Instead, where you have your best users is something like kind of action games and kind of quiz games, puzzle games, and really where we can hypothesize, I'll get to in a minute. But first, let's just graph that up a little bit so it's a bit easier to read. So here we can see that by far the most consistent, the broad, the big line here in the middle is the quiz games. Now the quiz games are a bit of a non sequitur. You wouldn't really expect so. And if you did, what we can hypothesize, and of course, hindsight is 20/20, but what we can hypothesize here is that probably more hardcore users that might like a bit of a more niched strategy game probably also don't spend that much time in other strategy games, because they probably don't like being hassled by 15 push notifications an hour or buying coins for everything that you want to do in the game at all. And instead they were kind of opting for more kind of clever quizzes, physics puzzles, that sort of thing. That's easy to say now. So now that we can move on, we'll do our global launch, or they'll do their global launch next week, and they can call up the game next week and say, okay, I found this out. Now I know this. And that's where it gets a little bit more interesting, because the kind of power marketing tools that I was alluding to before, we have retargeting. I believe someone's talking about deep linking a little bit later today. We have a lot of these interesting kind of things that we can do with networks these days that I'm seeing becoming increasingly common. Like last year, we saw it a little bit, but retargeting is really becoming a big theme in my inbox right now. And so what we can do now, of course, we can look at all these users that we've analyzed. We have all this store data. We have categorized all the users by exactly where they came from, what context they had when they came in. And from there we could say, okay, well, let's take a look at, okay, maybe I do want the action users, right? Maybe I do want the other strategy users. Maybe they pay a lot in these kind of games. They're just not getting it when they first get in. So at that point, what we can do, of course, we can deep link, we can pull up a different onboarding process, tweak it for this particular segment, having found that segment beforehand, and then able to say, okay, you're a strategy user, I'll give you a slightly different way of getting into this slightly more hardcore game. Same thing, we can go back to these puzzle gamers. If they're coming out and they're not so engaged anymore, we start thinking about, okay, how do I pull you back in the app? And that's only really possible when you start having identified the segment that you really want to be looking for. So that said, that's pretty much my case study today. That's pretty much the main thing I wanted to go through. I suppose we have some time for questions?
Yeah, I've got a few minutes.
Cool. Anything?
Any questions on retargeting, analytics?
Hang on.
Wait, sorry. Can you just who you are?
Bob from Absinthe. For retargeting, is it possible to do it now, so if we had an app, well, we manage an app that's had 10 million downloads, got around 1 million active users, so 90% now kind of lost. And okay, now we're starting to think, okay, we need retargeting, but are those 9 million lost? You know, is there any way to install something which will allow us to go back to those users who once were users? Is there a way, you know, we can advertise and identify that, you know, they have our app installed without actually having, you know, the SDK in that version of the app that you know, they once downloaded? Is that kind of, you know, lost users? Or?
For sure. I mean, this depends a little bit on, like, if we're going to get technical about it, it depends a little bit on the architecture of the app. For example, like, if you do a lot of deep linking, and you should, this is a great idea, and you should build your app early on to allow this, because a lot of the times it's harder to implement later. But let's say you have a deep link in the app, and you register a deep link with the OS. Then what you can wind up doing is you can just check for that deep link, sniff it out, see if it exists, and then of course we know that the app is already there, and then we can just pull people right into that. It does take a bit of planning. I mean, this stuff, you know, if we're talking really legacy, if we're talking back, you know, 2011 or something, you're gonna have a bit of a bad time. But generally speaking, if and this is also critical when you're building a new app, thinking about some of the sustainability, thinking about some of the future things that you might want to do, even if it doesn't seem like something you want to do right now, even just giving yourself the ability to kind of go back to those legacy users and doing that sort of thing is something that you might want to think about.
Okay, cool. Thank you.